Billy. Give it up for Billy. That's a lot to read. And let's not kid ourselves. We all had our doubts, right? I mean, about him being able to read. Like, that was, we all were a little nervous, so that was a lot to take in. Nice job, Billy. Yeah, we will not do that every single week as we go through Genesis, but I think with this one it's important. Yeah, I know, right? You're like, we already preached long enough. We don't have time to read the entire Bible as well. But this one is very important because honestly, if we don't get this one right, we kind of don't get anything else right. So we have to get this chapter right and kind of understand it. I don't know if I was to ask you what we just read, what it's about. If I was to say, what is it about? We might have different answers and different answers that we would come up with on that question. What is this story about? What is it trying to tell us? What is the point of this scripture? I think we'd all have different answers on that. And we have different answers about that a lot with stories in general. Because there's another story that I think, I watched it yesterday to make sure I was right about this. But I watched this story yesterday that I think is very similar. And if I was to tell you that I think there's a lot of similarities between this story and another one, you might not believe me. But the other story that I think is similar to this is one called Jurassic Park. Maybe you've heard of it. And I watched the original movie yesterday with Jane. It's one of her favorite movies. And as we watched it, it's not similar for the reason you think it's similar. This is not because there's dinosaurs or because that's not really the goal here. It's similar in the way that it tells a story that I think you and I would have different answers about what it's about. If I were to ask you right now, what is Jurassic Park about? You would probably say it's about dinosaurs. It's about what happens when we try to make something maybe that we shouldn't out of creation. It might be about some other things that you might think of in different stories. And most of the time we would think about the logistics. It's about, some of us would be like, it's about what it's like to run a theme park where dinosaurs are the feature or how to make these things happen or whatever. We would think that kind of story. But actually, if you pay attention to the story, in the very first scene, there is this moment where Dr. Grant and I think it's Ellie or Laura Dern, whatever her name is in the movie. They are together. What is it? Somebody knows. Oh, Jane knows, of course. Jane knows. Should have known Jane would know. Ellie is there, and the two of them are having a conversation about dinosaurs. There's a dinosaur on the screen. They're looking at bones on the screen. And it turns out Dr. Grant, he doesn't understand the computers and the technology, because that's too newfangled for him. He's an old school paleontologist, not one of these new fancy guys. And so he's looking at the screen. Laura Dern makes fun of him about his inability to understand the computers. But then he says something about this dinosaur. And if you remember, there's a child that comes out of nowhere. Anybody remember this? There's a volunteer. It's a kid who's volunteering at this dig site, and he comes over. He's maybe 12, 13 years old, and he comes over to have an argument with Dr. Grant. And Dr. Grant is pretty harsh with him. In fact, just a couple years ago, the guy who played this kid in the movie, his name is Whit Hurtman. Whit Hurtman wrote an article about playing this part in Jurassic Park where he was like, I was a 12-year-old kid. Why is this guy coming at me so hard? Like my role was I played a volunteer on the dig site who's 12 years old. Like, why are we having this argument where you're like coming at me? And if you remember, he comes at him with a raptor's claw. And he comes at him with that and he basically tells him that he could tear him up with the raptor's claw. He holds this claw in front of a child. This is the beginning of the movie. It starts off at a 10, and he comes at this kid. Now, actually, the movie progresses in many ways with this story of dinosaurs and action. There's all kinds of other things that you can think of. But if you pay attention to the story and in what it really is trying to say to us, it's not just about the logistics of things. It's actually about life and about love and about meaning. Almost midway through the movie, Dr. Grant has a moment where he comes across two other kids. There's these two other children. Because after he sees the first kid, he says, I never want children. He has this big dialogue about how bad it is, how they smell bad, how they cost a lot. He's not wrong. But he has this argument with Ellie about this, saying he never wants that. But midway through the movie, he meets Tim and Lexi, and they come alongside of him, these two kids that are kind of an orphan. They're with him now. And there's actually a scene midway through where a dinosaur comes at them. He saves the kids from the dinosaur, and as he sits there, he leans back against a tree, and the two kids lean up against him, and they fall asleep on his chest. And he takes that raptor's nail that he was holding, and he actually throws it off a cliff. The thing that was holding him back, the thing that he was using as a weapon against others, he's now giving up, and he's accepting this family that's coming to him, these people that he once told us he was against. And at the end of the movie, The last scene is not dinosaurs. It's not even the dinosaur or the T-Rex hero shot that we're used to. The very last scene of the movie is Dr. Grant sitting in a plane as Laura Dern looks at him lovingly, and he holds these two children who he's now going to take into his custody. Like, that's where we end up. So you could tell me it's a story about logistics of running a theme park with dinosaurs in it. You could even, and we get stuck on those things. That's the stuff we're looking for, right? Most of us, if I ask you what is Jurassic Park about, you would tell me it's about a guy getting eaten by a T-Rex while he's sitting on the toilet. It's about Newman, who was from Seinfeld, getting eaten in a Jeep. It's about Samuel L. Jackson plays a nerd in the movie. He's a computer nerd. Samuel L. Jackson of all people, which is great because they also made Jeff Goldblum the coolest guy in the movie, which wild casting all over the place there, right? Could have really flipped those two probably and been okay with it. But that's what we think the movie's about. It's about this action adventure. And that takes away from us, not in a bad way, but it actually is something we get stuck on, where the story is actually about life and about love and about meaning. The same thing happens with us when we read the first chapter of Genesis. We get caught up in all the logistics of what's happening there. But it's a deeper story, and it has more to tell us than just what the logistics are. This was never meant to be just a logistical vehicle for us to understand how the world was created. That's not necessarily what the goal was. It's not a scientific book. This is not a scientific writing. As Billy read it, you saw there's a lot of repetition that happens in this book, right? A lot of things where it says, he created them, then he created them. It's going to say it 2 or 3 times about different things. Most of the time, that's how you know you're actually in a poem. You're not in a historical book about context for things that maybe you're not reading an encyclopedia, let's say it that way. You're reading a poem. It's a Hebrew poem. It actually has a rhythm and a flow that's hard for us to understand in English, but it actually is written to be a poem where things move from place to place the same way you would read any other poetry. Now, this is an ancient read for us. It's hard for us to understand, but I think the problem is you know the story. I mean, I don't have to, you read the story, you know the story. You know how it goes. You're going to understand that. I mean, whether you've seen it on The Simpsons or you've seen this portrayed in other places, this story has been used over and over again, right? You're familiar with the story, the beats of the story, how it goes. I think all of us have that, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because sometimes what that does to us is it makes us get too comfortable with understanding it and thinking we have some kind of knowledge with it. But the problem is when we try to think that this is the story we're supposed to have, we think, well, then it's a perfect 7 days. It's got to be in this exact same order. All these things have to be exactly where they are. When we read poetry or prose, we're not reading it as a scientific document. We're reading it as a beautiful story that tells a deeper truth more often than not. I don't know if you've ever read Romeo and Juliet and thought, man, that is a fantastic historical narrative about how to get a girl. You know what I mean? Like, that's what that story's about. It's like, it's great narrative on this, right? I don't know if you've read poetry and thought that was there for me to scientifically study it. Because if you have, you've missed the point of poetry, right? It's not for scientific study. It's for deeper meanings to come about. And one of the problems I think we have is when we ask the question, what is this about? We're asking a question that the original authors were not trying to answer. Okay, so just follow me for a second. We're asking a question that the original authors were not trying to answer. Whew. Like, I don't know about you, but I think many of us, we are reading it through the lens of the culture that we are set in, not the culture they were set in. Okay? They're very different. Have you ever been to another culture? Just even, it doesn't have to be a big thing, a small thing. If you've been to another country, another culture, when Steve goes to Honduras, when I've gone to other countries, when you've been to other countries, you go in with a little bit of humility, right? Like, everything I say is not going to be transferable perfectly. I need to have a little bit of humility to understand what you're saying. Even when I went to another country not long ago, it was called Pensacola. And it's wild up there. Because you know the old saying that the further north you go in Florida, the further south in America you really are. Because you're like really in the south, you know? And I was up there, which I can't say too much about. Like, I can't like really. Alec gave me this today, and I played with. It's a capo that is an alligator face. Which I'm going to take up there next time because I'll fit right in, you know? But I was in Pensacola, and I mean, I'm sitting there with people, and it's in this little small town outside of Pensacola in the Panhandle of Florida. And I'm sitting with them, and I said something about a place that we were going and where we were going to go for this meeting. And I said, I don't know where it is. I can't find it on my phone. I can't find it on the GPS because I don't know if you know, they just got running water up there, so like GPS is new. And I was like, I can't find it on there. And they're like, okay, well, here's where you go. And they literally all look at each other and they're like, it's just down the main drag. They literally said, down the main drag. That's not a street. That's not a thing. The main drag. It's not called main drag. It's not called main or drag. It's just main drag. But that's what they said. Go down the main drag. And once you get past the 2 trees, you'll see it on your right. That's what they said, the 2 trees. I was like, this cannot be how we give directions. This is not a thing, right? But with humility, I'm sitting in their culture and I'm going to go, well, okay, that's how you give directions. That's how this works. I'm going to, again, go try to figure out how to make Google Maps work on my phone, but thank you for this. I'm going to accept that with humility. I'm going to understand it in the culture that it's coming from, not the culture that I'm giving to it. We read this story sometimes with, I think, the lens that we want it to be on. We want the American 21st century version of this story to make sense to us. That's not how it was written. That's not what the authors were trying to convey. They did not have you and I in mind when this was written. They weren't thinking of you and I. They were thinking of making sense of what was going on in their culture in the day that it was. And by doing that, we have to understand this ancient Hebrew culture, which God chose, by the way. Don't think this was on accident. God chose an ancient Hebrew culture to be the ones who carry this message. So it's on purpose that it comes through their lens. But ancient Hebrew culture was a storytelling culture, not a scientific culture. You and I, we live in a scientific culture, whether you want to think so or not. We have lived in this for a long time where we want science to be the lens we see things through. It needs to make sense. It needs to be logical. We want the logistics version of this. That's what we're looking for in a lot of things. You and I mean, that's how we do things now, right? Because you all know that you could go out of here and you could do your own research on all these things. We love to do our own research. It's the culture we live in. In this scientific world, that's what we've been built up with. This story has often been seen through a scientific lens. How did the 6 days work? What were all the machinations that made things come together? What is it trying to teach us scientifically? And I just got to say, that's the lens we want to put on it. I mean, I've been to the Creation Museums in Kentucky and in that area. If you haven't been to Ken Ham's Creation Museum, it's great to go see. I think it's a good thing. There's a lot of good things about it. I will say I have some real problems with it because we're trying to take a poem and force a poem into a scientific literature. Does that make sense? If you've ever read a scientific magazine, which I have, maybe you have, I haven't found a lot of poetry in it. Found a lot of white papers, haven't found a lot of poetry. And vice versa. If I've read Robert Frost, I was not reading it thinking this is going to have all the facts I need. Right? That's not what it's for. These are different forms of understanding this. Now, it doesn't mean that one is not true, because truth can be found in both places, right? But this is not a scientific lens. It's a story lens, and we're asking the wrong questions. I remember when Jane and I, we were walking through the Creation Museum, and it's, again, there were some things about it I really enjoyed. There was a really cool section they had on dinosaurs and dragons and that whole thing, which was good because, in a way, at least we were finally admitting that dinosaurs are, like, real. Because there was a while where Christians didn't want to say that, which is kind of problematic because, I don't know about you, I've seen some of the fossils where you're like, looks pretty real to me. But they were at least admitting that. But there was a whole thing on dragons, which Jane was very excited about. And they were basically making the case that dragons were part of a dinosaur breed of some sort. Maybe biblical authors saw the two as the same thing, whatever, which was great. It was very cool. But there were so many things that I was trying to figure out and try to, like, wrestle through. I just want to say, we're not going to get to the bottom of that. Today, we're not going to be able to say, was it exactly 7 days? Where were the dinosaurs in this? Or we're not going to be able to answer some of the questions you're probably wondering. We will obviously answer if the Earth's flat or not, because the answer is obviously yes. That's a joke. But we will, we will not be able to answer every single question because it wasn't designed to do that. That's not what the goal was here. We're trying to read with a scientific lens. And really, the church has had this split ever since Galileo. In the 1615, Galileo wrote this letter to, and he actually was quoting one of the archbishops at the time. He was using a cardinal's own words against him. But Galileo wrote to the church, and he said this book, he said, the Bible is about how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. That's what he said. Galileo said this. Now, Galileo actually himself was part of the Catholic Church at the time. He was not necessarily outside of that. Most early Christians, by the way, most early Christians in this Enlightenment era of the early 1600s and even before that, most Christians around that time were using science not as a way to disprove God. The goal was actually to prove what God had done. There was really no disconnect. It was not until the church decided to take its ball and go home, not the scientists. And the church decided it didn't want much to do with this at the time, and so it kind of went its own way. And you still see that divide a lot of times. In fact, we have many Christian universities across America that were influenced by this decision, even today, to say we don't want to be part of the science community, we'd rather do something different, where science was not designed to disprove God. In fact, I believe if you dig hard enough into science, you will only prove that there is a God. There's still something that's missing there, and this story does help us to understand what it is. And so Galileo writes this to say this is the way that we should view it, because he was saying that this is not a scientific letter to us. This is not a scientific story for us. It is a story. The early Hebrew culture was one of the best at telling stories. To this day, we have many stories in our vocabulary that came from their Hebrew culture. And think about it for a second, but you needed to craft story. Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus* and all those different books, which he's not a Christian author by any means. He actually is a historical scholar at the historical Society of Jerusalem. Like, he comes out of Jerusalem. He is a Jewish man by nature, but he does write from a pagan's point of view. Very interesting stuff. I loved actually *Sapiens*, fantastic book, but he wrote a book recently about information technologies. It was about AI, where we're heading with information technologies. And he wrote this in his book where he said stories, speaking of ancient cultures, were the first crucial information technology developed by humans. The ancient Hebrews, think about it for a second, but you don't have a way to write things down. Most of the time there was not a lot of alphabet for at least a lot of years. We did not necessarily have ways to write things down. Humans were not just sitting there coming up with alphabets that could be used across the board. Our alphabet, for instance, was not designed for many, many years because the Phoenicians didn't come along and they only used it to trade. We were using pictures mostly, right? That's what you saw. You still see hieroglyphics. You would see pictures on the side of cave walls because the goal was to tell a story. Why? Because you were moving place to place. You couldn't take things with you. You didn't have scrolls to write on. It was very hard to do that. So you needed to take a story or take your history with you. And so that history or that story went place to place with the group, the nomadic tribe that they were. And most groups were nomadic. In fact, it wasn't until we started to figure out how to farm that most people would say that the land, we did not tame the land tamed us. We started to stay in one place, therefore you could write things down. You could put things on the walls of a cave because you were going to be there longer. But for most of the time, you were moving place to place constantly. So what you needed to pass things down was a story. And the Hebrews were great at telling stories because that's how they conveyed message after message. They conveyed truth from generation to generation. This story was absolutely one that would have been passed down from generation to generation, from person to person. But it needs to be understood as a story, not a scientific article. That's the goal of it. And the story will tell us about itself and what it's trying to tell us by the structure of how it was made. Again, the Hebrews crafted stories with specific structure in mind to tell us more about what's going on in the story. So let's look at the structure of this story just really quickly. This might be a little bit small, I apologize. But the goal is that you see that there's a prologue in the beginning, Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2. Notice the word beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's where we start. That's what we want to see. Then there's going to be 6 days. 6 days of forming and filling. The first 3 days really are about forming the earth. It's about forming different things, putting different things in place, creating those different mechanisms. Most of it's about forming. By the way, it's not actually all about creating. I know that sounds weird. Creating isn't all of it. A lot of it's about forming what's already been created. But there's forming. Then the next 3 days, days 4, 5, and 6, really are based around filling up this earth that's been formed. Then there's an epilogue, kind of this last piece, where notice it bookends itself. At the beginning it said, in the beginning the heavens and the earth were created. At the end it's going to say, and so the heavens and the earth were, the beginning said it was beginning, now it says they are finished. See the bookends of the structure? See how this works? We're going to work within that structure to try to understand what's happening in the story and what this story is about, based on the structure that these storytellers give us. So if you have your Bible, I'd encourage you to open it. We're on page 1. So you should be able to find it, literally just page 1. Just open it up, Right past the table of contents, that's where we're going to be. Okay, Genesis 1, we're going to start right at verse 1. We're not going to walk through every single verse, but we are going to try to take apart this structure to understand what this storyteller is trying to tell us, what this culture is trying to explain to us, what this story means to us. So it says this at the beginning here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay. It's a big sentence, a lot for us to take in. You've heard this one before, I'm assuming. But it does tell us that there is a couple things that are important. First of all, if you know how this verse works, so we've talked about it before, this verse in itself is actually a little bit of an oxymoron. It kind of doesn't work together. So it actually, in the Hebrew, it says, in the beginning, it says, if you read it in the Hebrew, it'd say, in the beginning, God, they created the heavens and the earth, which is very confusing. So you know how your verbs and your subjects are supposed to match? You know what I'm talking about? Like, especially you see it in other languages even better than ours, if you know any Spanish or French or something like that, how you need to conjugate the verb, right? So that it matches what the subject is, right? So if I say, I were doing this, you would be like, that's probably not right. I was doing this, right? I were doing that. Now, again, I've been to the Panhandle of Florida. That works just fine. I were doing a lot of things up there. It's fine up there, right? So I were is how it would be wrong. But actually, because were would actually be like a plural, right? It would be they were. That's actually what's happening here, is that it says God, who is a singular noun, and here's the word Elohim. It's not the word Yahweh. It's not his formal name. But Elohim, God is singular, but then it says, but they created. The verb is plural. They created the heavens and the earth. I'm showing right off the bat there's a trinity involved here. God is not singular and by himself. There is already some form of community around him. So in the beginning, God, they created the heavens and the earth. And what it lets us know right off the bat is that there is this one who is. So God being God means that he has been and always will be. When God does give his formal name, later in Exodus, what does he say? He says, my name is Yahweh, right? Which means the one who is. Just is. It's not were, it's not was, it's not going to be. It is just always there. This verse lets us know that there is something that has been there and will always be there. So think about it for just a second, but this is what this is about. There was a time where you were not. There was a time where I was not. We just weren't. And then one day we just woke up to the world. One day we come out screaming and bloody, and we're mad about something probably, and we're dirty, and suddenly we are here. We're just here. There has to be something that always has been, though. Like you and I, we are just a temporary situation. We were born into this where there was a moment where we weren't, and we planned that there will be a soul that lives forever, but we were not at one point. I don't know, your beliefs or whatever, but I don't believe that you were something before this. I think this is where you started, and this is where you are now. There has to be something that just always was. The ancient storyteller is trying to say there's this God, there's this being who was here long before you, will be here long after you. There's something that put order to this place and put life into this place. In the beginning was this one who just continues. It's not you, it's something different. You needed something bigger than you to make this thing happen. Psalm 19 kind of echoes this. At the beginning of Psalm 19, it says, the heavens declare, notice this, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Notice that. This heavens, same language. The glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. God is active. He's always been. This nature is telling us about who he is and what he does. Day after day, it goes on. They pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. Those heavens, they're telling us about him. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them from the heavens. They don't make their own noise. Yet, Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Now, notice that God is not he is not nature, right? He's not the nature. He is the one who creates the nature. His fingerprints are all over it. In the same way, this is a clunky analogy, I know, that Steven Spielberg is not in all of Jurassic Park. He is not all of Jurassic Park. But his fingerprints are all over it, right? We wouldn't say that he's not part of it. He is absolutely showing up in it. He is revealing himself through it. This nature has to be created by one who is. The way that St. Augustine would say it. So Augustine, he wrote in his Confessions that he went out looking for this. And St. Augustine would say that he went place to place and he started to speak to nature, essentially. He said, tell me about what you are. Tell me what nature looks like. And in his work, Confessions, Augustine said that, he said, I asked the earth and it answered. I am not he, is what the earth said. I'm not God. The earth is not God. And whatsoever are therein made the same confession. I asked the sea and its deeps and the creeping things that lived. And they replied, we are not your God. Seek higher than we. And I answered unto all these things which stand about the door of my flesh. You have told me concerning my God that you are not he. Tell me something about him, nature. Tell me about him. And with a loud voice, they exclaimed, he made us. All of this was created by him with his fingerprints on it to show us about him. Now, we're going to get into this in a couple weeks, but in Genesis 3, what happens is we get those things out of order. This is where the fall happens, is there is a God who's in charge of this mankind, who's in charge of this creation, and we actually flip all of those things on their head and we start to worship the creation rather than the creator. And this is where things go off the rails. But I don't know. I mean, I believe that you and I are probably a lot like Augustine. I don't know if you're like me, but there are times where you are in nature, right? Have you ever had this experience? Where you're just in nature. It may be a mountaintop. It may be on the water. It may be on a beach somewhere. It may be when you travel overseas. It may be standing in front of one of the 7 great wonders of the world. Whatever your thing is, when you're camping outside, which bless your heart if you do that. And more power to you. When I go on vacation, I want to live better than my normal life, not worse. So I don't do camping. It's been a New Year's resolution of mine for like the last 5 years is to not go camping. And I've kept it every year. I'm very proud of myself. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So but I mean, if you're that person, like, that's great. Or if you go into nature, if you're kayaking, if you're out in the water, if you're on a mountain, you've been hiking for a while, whatever your thing is, you can't tell me that there is not a part of your soul that does not somehow find itself connecting with something that created that nature around you, right? Like, there's something in us that just feels that because we look at it and we say, this is something I could not have made. That somebody did make this. Something had to have come along for this to be the way it is. And my soul, your soul, I think we connect with nature in that way. Now, in that first verse, they separate two things. Remember, at the beginning and the end of this story is the same structure of what was created, the heavens and the earth. So back in verse 1, it says, now in the beginning, God created, what does he create? The heavens and the earth specifically. Now, when you and I think of the heavens and the earth, here's what I think we think of in this verse. Is like, here's a couple pictures, but I think we think the heavens are like just all the stars out there. You know, we kind of like look up into the cosmos. That's what the heavens are. Then we see the earth, and the earth looks like the globe itself. And notice, it's flat in this picture, so obviously. But we like look at, I think that's how we see the heavens and we see the earth. That's how those two things work. Now, in this passage, that's not necessarily what this means. These are much more localized and much closer to the individual. So the two words in Hebrew that you'll see, and you'll see them over and over again. This shows up multiple times in the scripture. This is not the only time these two words show up. But this Shemayim, which is the heavens or the sky, it's a little bit closer. Now, it does include the cosmos, but I do want to say, probably the people writing this, at the time they're writing this, are not fully aware that there is a difference between the stars out there and like what's inside of our ozone. Does that make sense? I don't know if you noticed or not. The ozone is invisible. I don't know if you've seen it or not. I haven't, because you can't. It's not. So there's kind of this idea of like everything up there and everything down here. Now, the word Eretz is the word for land or earth. And it does not mean earth like a globe. It means like the land you're standing on right now. Eretz would be where you would point and say this right here. In fact, there's a belief that Eretz, it comes from the word Erte, which is used in German still to this day, the word Erte. But Erte is considered maybe the oldest word in all of the world. Because people were always trying to figure out, like, that was a word that everybody had to use all the time. Right? You were kind of constantly figuring out where you were. Where did you stand? What were you on? Erte is considered maybe the oldest word in the world. You were constantly trying to figure out, this land is your land, and this land is my land, and, California and whatever. Like, you were figuring that out constantly. And so this is believed that this is a very common word, but it's not the world, the globe. It is the land you're standing on. It's like right here. And so there's a difference. Now, notice there are two sections that are happening right from the beginning of the Bible where it's setting up these two different, but not, I should say distinct, but not different. Two distinct, but not fully different areas. There is a heavens and there is an earth. There are two realms that work together and they depend on each other. These two do depend on each other. I want you to, we have a hard time understanding, I think in our culture we have a hard time understanding this, but in that early Hebrew culture, think about this for a second, but you're so tied to the land and to what happens on the land. It's so different than where we live. I've shared before, a few years ago, I was making salsa for a Christmas present. I was going to make a bunch of salsa and give it to coworkers in jars because I'm pretty cheap and that works. And it was like, I'll just get some jars and make some salsa and I'll put it in the jars. And so it's like, now of course, it's like the 23rd of December and I need to go get these tomatoes and these ingredients, right? So I go to the only place that's open still it's like midnight, literally midnight. Only place that's open on the 23rd of December at midnight, which is called Walmart. And if you want to know what hell looks like, go to Walmart at midnight on December 23rd. That's what hell will be. You will just be living there. And you walk in, every worker is just like a zombie. Like they don't want to be there. They're just trying to make ends meet. You are too. You're just trying to figure it out. It's just like war torn. There's barrels with fire coming out of them, just sitting, all around you. It looks like a horror scene. And you're like, and so you're walking through it. You're trying to find stuff. And I'm walking through, and I find tomatoes, and I find onions, and I find jalapenos. I put them all in my bag, and I start walking to the checkout. And I thought to myself, I actually thought this. I thought, I wonder if tomatoes are in season right now. No, I don't know. Does anybody know? I don't know these things. And you know why we don't know? It's because we don't have to worry about it. Like in our culture, in the world we live in right now, it kind of doesn't matter because they're kind of always in season, right? And it doesn't matter that in a normal, think about this thousands of years ago. I would not be going to Walmart at midnight. Why? Because it's completely dark and I have no way to light that. There would be no way for them to keep produce good because there's no electricity to refrigerate or to make whatever chemicals that go on Walmart's vegetables or whatever. They don't have those things yet. Right? I'm completely out of sync with the world around me, the seasons we're in, the way the world works. These people were completely in sync with every bit of that. Because what happens? You don't have a storehouse. Let's say it does not rain for a little bit. You don't eat. You either don't have enough food for your animals to eat or you do not have enough food for you. Let's say the sun shines for a little too long. What happens? You just lost your entire crop. You don't get to eat. Let's say the other side happens. Let's say that it's cloudy for too long and it rains too hard and it washes out all of your vegetables, all of your garden. You don't eat. There's a different dependence on these heavens because what comes from the heavens? The sun and the rain. This is why it's believed for so long that the gods lived in the sky, because the gods were the ones deciding what comes down from the sky and what goes up into the sky. They're the ones deciding when it's sunny, when it's raining. This is why I remember when Elijah is having a fight with the prophets of Baal, they start cutting themselves to try to get their God to pay attention and to send down fire from heaven, because it was believed there's a God in heaven. He's going to send these things down. That's how it's going to work. We have to do that to make our gods happy because our gods are kind of angry all the time. And there is a symbiotic relationship between those things in the sky and those things on the ground. There are two realms, and they do play together, and we still see it. Those two realms, the heavens and the earth, play together all through Scripture. I mean, what do we see Jesus pray? You can say it with me if you want. But our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in. Those are two different places, right? There's a difference in those realms. Now, they're not completely different. They are distinct. And what's interesting is they work as two different realms, but in the end, they end up marrying each other. The end of the story is when the heavens come to earth. And there is no separation of those two things anymore, but they are just one place. But at this time, God separates. He creates both the heavens and the earth. He creates both things. And he creates them with what it says in right after that in verse 2. It says, now the earth, speaking of the part down here, not the part up there, was formless and empty, and darkness covered the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now I want you to see just really quickly, notice that waters are already there. It doesn't say God created waters. The waters are already there. It's just interesting. There's covering the surface of the deep. There's already going to be this formless and empty thing. And with no light, because it's dark, there is no life. If there's no light, there is no life. That's as simple as it gets. And things were just kind of crazy and chaotic. The Hebrew here, again, speaking of that formless and empty, the word here is tohu wabahu. Yeah, tohu wabahu, which is really fun. And you should use that more in something. I don't know how you play Scrabble, but I would encourage the Hebrew Scrabble because it's more fun. Tohu wabahu is this formless and empty. But it also means like an unordered and uninhabited. This was the greatest fear of these people, that there would be a desert with nothingness. There would be an ocean with nothingness. Just nothing. And it had no order. Everything would have been chaos. But in verse 3, then suddenly everything starts to have an order to it. This is the forming that starts to happen. God said, let there be light. Now notice this. This is interesting because those first two verses we saw just a second ago. In the beginning, God creates. Secondly, then it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the deep. And now notice what happens. There's the word that's spoken. Most people would say this is the third step right here. This is where Jesus comes in. This is the word that is spoken, the word made flesh. And suddenly light shows up because there's a word spoken. God doesn't create light with his hand. He creates it by speaking something. And he says, this is the word that I'm speaking to you. There is now light in the darkness. Now, it's hard not to see here if you're not paying attention. John chapter 1, what does John write? John chapter 1, in the beginning. Notice John starts with in the beginning. Most people thought John was a heretic for doing this, by the way, because he starts with the most sacred words in the entire Hebrew Scripture, in the beginning. And he starts his gospel saying, in the beginning was the, what? The Word. This word that's spoken to you. And the word was with God, and the word was God. There's a Trinity that was there in the beginning. And he says he was with God in the beginning. And then he says, through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that's been made. In him was life, and that life was the light. Notice light, which is what he just spoke, of all mankind. And that light shines into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. This is what John's talking about, is this exact moment where God speaks light into the world. Now, what's interesting is at the end of that verse, it says that in Genesis 1 verse 4, it says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separates, again, we're separating things here, separates light from darkness. And notice God calls the light day. He called the darkness night. But notice this, there was evening and there was morning the first day. I want you to notice, he didn't fully take away the dark. Like he didn't just say it's sun forever. This is Alaska in the summertime type of thing. Darkness remains a part of the story. I'll just say, I think this is a pattern of redemption that God is setting up from here on out. Is that I don't think any of us have a perfect up and to the right trajectory of our spiritual lives. I think that there is a pattern where darkness still plays a part. And darkness still shows up. And it's not just you accepted Jesus and everything is bright and sunny for the rest of your life. But it turns out there's a little bit more to it. There's a darkness pattern that sets itself up and will still be there. We still have to wrestle with the darkness over and over again. So then it begins this forming and filling. And I'm going to try to get moving here as quick as I can because we got a lot to finish up on. But here, I want you to see the next thing that happens is forming and there's filling. So those next 3 days, we start the forming and we start the filling of how this is going to go. So again, if you want to look at the structure of how this goes, day 1, we see light and dark are formed, and we see day and night. Then we see the waters above and the waters below, right? Then we're going to see that there's sea and there's dry land. That's all the forming. Then we're going to start filling it up with the plants, with the lights, with the firmaments, all the fun stuff that's going to happen with the filling. So from there it moves into chapter 1, verse 6, where it says that, and God said, let there be a vault between, and he's going to separate the water from the water. Now notice there's water that's on the ground, there's water that's down below in the earth side, and there's going to be water that goes up to the heavens. And it's this vault because there is a question. How does the water go up there? Because there's rain that comes down. How's it staying up there? Like, what's keeping it there? Which is a good question, to be honest. Still, I've watched the things, and I still don't fully understand. If you were to tell me how the cycle of water works and what clouds it's going into and all that, I went to school I went to normal schools, and I still don't fully understand how it works. But they were asking the same question we asked. Like, okay, so this is where it's at. It's in the sky. Something had to separate those two things. There's a vault between the waters and the water. God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And so it was good. And God called the vault on the top, the sky. And there was evening and there was morning. Now what you see is he's separating things at this point horizontally. Like he's taking these things horizontally, splitting them in half and moving this water this way. But then he starts to separate vertically as well. He starts to move things this way. The next day, verse 9, God said, let the water under the sky be gathered in one place so that dry ground appears. It just kind of shows up because this moves. And so it was so. And God called this dry ground land, and he gathered the waters and called them seas. And God saw that it was very good. So he moves things horizontally, then vertically. Then verse 11, and God said, let the land produce vegetation. Now this is where we start to go from forming to filling. Notice things are going to start to fill themselves up. Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit, with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, seed-bearing plants, all these different things. That's what's happening. Now I want you to see, as he starts to say this, he says that there's going to be seed-bearing plants, something that has life, and that life can then reproduce itself. It can create life itself. He's setting up a pattern of something that's going to be pure and beautiful, where it can create its own life. This seed will fall from this plant, and when this one dies, the next one will live. There's going to be this constant death to life cycle that's going to start to happen. As we're going to continue to see it. This death to life cycle is going to lead us all the way up to what we see in the Gospels with Jesus. There's a death to life cycle that's going to happen. Something's going to die so that something else can live. Something else will give up this so that it creates a seed for the next thing. But what he creates is so perfect. I mean, it's so perfect. It's crazy to me. Have you ever, I know a few years ago, we were in Yellowstone. We're driving through Yellowstone National Park. And there is a mountain just completely on fire, just like blaze, massive amounts of trees on fire. And we were like, oh no, that seems bad, right? Like that's probably not good. And as we drove through, there was smoke everywhere, and we got to the end of it, and we got past it, and we stopped at the next stop, and we said, like, there's a massive mountain, like, on fire. Is there something somebody should do? Like, what happens now? And the people that lived there said, no, that's just normal. Happens every year. It's the way that nature takes care of itself. And they said, no, we don't do anything with it. This will burn away the chaff, and then it will start to regrow itself. That's how it works. I mean, you can still go where Mount St. Helens erupted years ago, walk through there, and there's an area that's closed off. Why? Because they don't want you to try to fix it. Nature will fix itself there. Where hurricanes have happened, up in North Carolina, some of the lakes, they told us that you can't be on there as people because it's got to heal itself. It's going to do a better job than you would. God has created this type of system that's going to fill itself. It's going to heal itself. And then at the end of this, he creates this filling where he starts creating not just the lamp, but those lights that he was using. The lights are going to fill as well. Verse 14, God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve," notice this, "as signs to mark sacred times, days, and years." God delegates his authority in a way here. Use them as signs so that this image that I have of being the light of the world is used through them. This creation is a sign of himself. Use them as signs. In fact, he goes on just a couple verses later, and he says in verse 17, God put them in this vault, and it says, to govern the day and the night. They're governing, like they have actual ruling authority, these lights. That God is delegating himself into that creation. That's what he's doing. Almost the same way he does it with mankind. Verse 26, what does he say? He says, let them be made in our image about mankind. It's a sign. Let them be a sign. Let them be made in my image. And what are they going to do? They're going to rule over. They're going to rule over the earth. And some of this stuff, I'm just warning you. I know today is a lot of just like we have to set this up to get to more stuff later. But again, what does he say to them? He says that they need to rule over the earth and the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the creatures along the ground. This is why C.S. Lewis would say that you were made in God's image. You are an image bearer. He says, let them be made in our image. This is why C.S. Lewis wrote, there are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal. Now, I love this. He says, nations, cultures, arts, civilizations, those are mortal. And their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is with immortals whom we joke, with whom we marry, we snub, and we exploit. Either we are immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. You have been given the image of God. The soul within you lasts forever. You have been made in this image. And from there, he gives us the mandate. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And this is important with what's coming up in the next few weeks here. Verse 28. So then God, he blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves along the ground. God delegates that authority to mankind. This is the work you have to do. Now, I want you to notice that happens before there is a fall. So remember, work is actually something God delegates to us, that he gives to us, not as a punishment, but as a pleasure. This Genesis mandate is something he gives to us to allow us to be part of the work he has been doing. He has been creating, and now he delegates creation to us. He has been working, and now he delegates work to us. We are made in his image to do the work that he set out to do. So verse 31, we've been set up for this for a long time. We've had 6 days. And if you go to the structure of how it's set up, every day, 6 days, right? It says that there was evening and there was morning. It was evening and there was morning. For 6 different days, the structure of this says that there was evening and there was morning. But on day 7, notice this, it says on verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning. That was the end of the 6th day. That's how it ends. But in chapter 2 it says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. But verse 2 of chapter 2, by the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. On the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Now, this is where you would assume that there's going to be, and there was evening and there was morning on the 7th day. But instead it just says, then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. See, again, the pattern that should be here in the structure of this, day 1, evening and morning. Day 2, there was evening and morning. Day 3, evening, morning. Every day there's evening and morning. It sets us up to think that's what's going to happen on day 7. But guess what? It never says that on day 7. Day 7 is just a day that lasts forever. There's no end to it nor beginning to it. It never gets dark again, according to day 7. Now, I want you to think about this in the Jewish culture. If you know about this, this is why this pattern of sevens matters so much. To be honest, our week to this day, the reason we have a 7-day week that we count Sunday through Saturday is because of this Genesis story. That's why we have it. It wasn't from something else. It doesn't even make sense if you think about it, the 7 days, if you were to line it up with our calendars. It's kind of a mess, isn't it? But we keep 7 days because this is the pattern of what's been set up for us. And on that 7th day, this is why God would later come along and say there's a year of Jubilee. When was the year of Jubilee? Every 7 years. So that at the end of 7 years, it's all starting over. It's bright again. There's no darkness in sight. This is why John, in the book of John, he writes about signs the same way that you saw just in Genesis chapter 1, where there are signs of those stars in the sky that speak to God's glory. When John writes in his book, he writes many times about signs and wonders. He does not call them miracles. He calls them signs and wonders. And you know what he does is he puts 7 different signs and wonders in his book. If you read through it, there's 7 different signs and wonders because he wants us to see there's this everlasting light. But then he does a fun little thing. And at the end of it, he adds an 8th day. And the 8th sign and wonder that he adds to it is Jesus' resurrection. But where does Jesus resurrect in the book of John? Who does he talk to? He's in a garden. He's in a garden. In fact, when Mary comes to speak to him, she thinks he's a gardener or somebody who would be putting order to a garden. This pattern sets us up for the entire rest of the Bible. Not for logistics, but for us to understand the deeper meanings behind it. That this is about love, and this is about life, and this is about what we're here for, the meaning behind why we are here. Because there's a day that will last forever. There is a day coming where there is no night again. What does Revelation say? The very last page of the Bible. Very last. We're on the first page. The very last page of the Bible, Revelation chapter 22. It says at the very end of time, the last thing we're going to see is there's going to be a day in Revelation where it says that there will be a day where there is no more night. It says that there will be day and there will never be night again. Revelation 22, let me see if I can find it for you really quickly. It says this, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth." He talks about this new heaven and this new earth. But in chapter 22, it says Eden is restored. And it says, in Eden restored, chapter 22, "Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb, down the middle of a great street. On each side of the river stood a tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and the Lamb will be in the city, and his servants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever." There is a day coming where there will be no more night. So if I ask you what this story is about, you might want to talk about the logistics of it, but I would say there's something deeper going on. It's about love, it's about life, it's about meaning. That's what this story is trying to tell us and set us up for the entire rest of this book. So if I could give you just a couple things to walk away from with this, just a couple things. There's a couple things that I would say. If I was saying, what is this about? First, I would say it's about the fact that there is a creator, and guess what? He is good. When he makes things, they are good. There is a creator, and he is good. I don't believe you can read this story and not think that there's a creator who wants a relationship with his creation. He's good. He wants a relationship with us. Secondly, there is work, and guess what? It's yours. You do have work to do. You are co-creating with the creator of the universe. He has delegated work to you. And we'll get into that more vocationally in the next couple weeks. But that, I think, is an important thing for us to understand, is that we're not totally off the hook. It's not that he's creating and leaves us alone. He says that you now take this creation and you rule over it. That you take care of the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and you are fruitful and multiply. That's your job on this earth. Third, he says, there is rest. There is rest, though, and it is coming. It's on its way. And there will be a day where there is no more night. So this morning as we close, I want us just to sing a little about this creation and what it looks like to see his creation. I want us to sing about that and what it's meaning, that it's crying out in wonder of him. My hope is that as we walk through this, this isn't an academic exercise, but that we do start to see these patterns that God has set up for us, and that we start to see ourselves not in a logistical sense, but what his life looks like, what his version of love looks like, and what his version of meaning for us looks like as we walk through this together. So if you would, let's stand together as we close. Father, we thank you. We thank you for this story that's endured for